Getting right to the heart of the subject matter, this is a section of the PATRIOT Act, later renamed the USA Freedom Act in 2015, allowing legal experimentation on the public with biological and chemical weapons under Title 50, Chapter 32, Section 1520. The use of human subjects will be allowed for the testing of chemical and biological agents by the U.S. Department of Defense, accounting to congressional committees with respect to the experiments and studies. The Secretary of Defense may conduct tests and experiments involving the use of chemical and biological agents on civilian populations. There are additional clauses defining consent of test subjects, what would be allowable under the heading of experimentation, and mentioning congressional approval, which I'll link and you can view for yourself. But I think it goes without saying that the military and so-called government have a long history of experimenting on the population without consent. The list of offenses is too lengthy to detail here, but one interesting and telling example is as follows. In 1994, Senator John D. Rockefeller issued a report revealing that for at least 50 years, the Department of Defense, DoD, had used hundreds of thousands of military personnel in human experiments and for intentional exposure to dangerous substances. Materials included mustard and nerve gas, ionizing radiation, psychochemicals, hallucinogens, and drugs used during the Gulf War. That's only one in a long list of examples. With all the fears of chemtrails in the skies, not only the fears of conspiracy theorists, but also of those in positions of authority and the subject of town hall meetings, could there be a legal loophole allowing the military and government to cover the skies with a host of elements, compounds, and possibly even nanotechnology? And even if they do get caught, can they use these loopholes to avoid being sued by the public? By the way, if you're unfamiliar with the difference between a chemtrail and a contrail, contrails dissipate behind a jet, which you can clearly see as they're flying, whereas chemtrails may linger for hours. And while all this has been relegated to the category of conspiracy theory for the most part, even with the admission of chemtrails by the establishment, I thought it was worth noting that a famous FBI agent, Ted Gunderson, also had something to say about chemtrails. Gunderson was the special agent in charge of the Los Angeles FBI office, who many feel was murdered for his exposing satanic ritual abuse, cults, and pedophilia at high levels of government.
The death dumps, otherwise known as chemical trails, are being dropped and sprayed throughout the United States, in England, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Europe, and I have personally seen them not only in the United States but in Mexico and Canada. Birds are dying around the world. Fish are dying by the hundreds of thousands around the world. This is genocide. This is poison. This is murder by the United Nations. This element within our society that's doing this must be stopped. I happen to know of two of the locations where the airplanes are that dump this crap on us. 4 of the planes are out of the Air National Guard, Lincoln, Nebraska, and the other planes are out of Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I personally have observed the planes that were standing still in Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, at the Air National Guard. They have no markings on them. They're huge, bomber-like airplanes with no markings. This is a crime. Crime against humanity, crime against America, crime against the citizens of this great country.
Genocide is the opinion of most who suffer the effects of chemtrail dumping, eugenics, population control, culling the herd, as they say. In this montage I made, I only used my own photos of chemtrails, mainly because I can't verify other people's images, though there are some that make my own look harmless by comparison. Some look like they were playing cloud tic-tac-toe or were distinctly creating a grid pattern. Mine only alludes to it, but they definitely lingered for a very long time. Granted, I haven't seen many chemtrails this entire summer of 2017, though ironically there was one straight up in the sky right before I recorded this, but during the winter and early spring they were spraying pretty regularly. and heavily. I also live fairly close enough to a major military base and airport, enough to at least be irradiated in a nuclear conflict. So the fact that they're coating themselves, let alone our food crops, with whatever is in chemtrails is pretty amazing. It would suggest that there couldn't possibly be anything inherently harmful, but that's not what researchers examining the soil and taking other samples are claiming. Maybe not so strangely enough, the topic of the PATRIOT Act and legal experimentation usually comes up about electronic harassment, organized gang stalking, and targeted individuals, TIs. I consider it a direct link in any case, but it occurred to me to be more relevant to chemtrailing and the many elements and radioactive materials that are claimed to be delivered by them. You can see from the headlines that chemtrails are now acknowledged by the establishment, though they claim their use to fight global warming mainly, climate change, which is also a farce. If anything, they're causing it to happen. They're certainly not dropping all these chemtrails to cloud seed and make rain, and I'm sure by now you've made the connection with the nanofibers and smart dust included in the montage. And if it weren't for the fibers people are digging out of their skin, I would say things like Morgellons disease might actually be related to genetically modified organisms, GMOs, and carcinogenic-laden chemicals and preservatives being added to the food supply. While some of these people may be suffering from exposure to both, meaning it's possible that chemtrail dumping might actually initiate a reaction from the other chemicals we ingest, it's likely these people are hosts for a new form of technology that seems to have a life of its own. If it were a two-phase plan of ingestion, food and air, that would protect the government with plausible deniability. I mean, what is that? Is this normal? I guess if you're the clinically detached type, maybe, but not to most of us. This is from a presentation by Harold Couch-Vella, a researcher pretty well known for his theories on Morgellons and nanofibers. Obviously the very thing many people seem to be pulling out of their skin these days. Some go to lengths to experiment on themselves to eradicate the fibers as well as the toxic chemicals. One channel I came across, Look Out for Charlie, offers some tips including treatment like known diseases, specifically sporotrichosis, taking Epsom salt baths, drinking borax solutions, and even taking potassium iodide, radiation pills. If you happen to be one of those suffering from the unexplainable symptoms and can't get help from a doctor, or would likely kill you with a pharmaceutical death pill anyway, then you might want to try some of Charlie's methods. Many people claim to help them, but I can't speak on that personally, so use at your own risk, but it seems legit anyway. I won't speak on the technical aspects of smart dust or nanofibers either, as I'm no expert, but it seems to me it would be very expensive to drop a payload of those on any given city, even at only 10 cents each, and even just hitting the major metropolitan areas. But let's entertain that the military-industrial complex, a creation of bank stores with unlimited resources, might actually do such a thing. That would mean half the country might be unwittingly microchipped with RFIDs now, also meaning trackable targets. But there is an even more sinister prospect in breaking the consent laws, turning us all into cyborgs in the near future. The possibilities with this are immense. As if the prospect of ingesting atomic-scale RFID chips isn't enough, several Washington, D.C. monuments were found in the quote-unquote unknown biofilm covering. This is very similar to the black goo often talked about, which is thought to be a form of programmable matter. It is otherwise considered an abiotic mineral oil from the upper crust containing high amounts of M-state gold and iridium, and exhibits an unknown type of magnetism. Strange. Black goo, as well as every other color goo, has been featured in conspiracy videos and often appears in movies and television as something inherently evil, like concentrated evil itself. It started with the movie The Blob in the 1950s and seems to keep coming up in science fiction and horror movies mainly. While what is covering the Washington, D.C. monuments may not be the same black goo that keeps cropping up in transhumanism, smart dust, and nanofiber videos and websites, could it be related to chemtrail deliveries anyway? I would call it relevant, whatever it might be. If you've had trouble convincing others that chemtrails are real, as I have, you might want to get them to watch the public hearing on July 15, 2014, of the Shasta County Air Quality Management Board discussing geoengineering and chemtrails. Pilots, doctors, lawyers, and people at least relatively qualified to speak on the subject make their concerns known. Though in the 3 years since that meeting, it would seem not a lot has come of it. California continues to be sprayed heavily as far as I've been informed, and obviously it's happening here. I'll leave a link, and there's also a truncated version for people with SAS, short attention span syndrome. No thanks to chemtrails, no doubt, that's quite a lot of us these days. One thing that stood out for me during that meeting was the mention of aluminum, one of the many elements in chemtrails. In a significant enough concentration, it could be a catalyst for the many wildfires sweeping the US and likely other countries, making them more difficult to fight. That should help stop global warming, eh? Granted, forest fires are a normal cycle of nature. It just seems to me wildfires have been increasing for the last few years, while drought seems to have increased along with it. Just recently, local cities here were covered in a thick haze because of fires not even in our own state. Who's to say what some of the other chemicals and elements in chemtrails might be doing to the environment? Let alone the obvious nanofibers and mysterious diseases and cancer people are contracting from them. For those who are aware of the thermite theory of 9/11 and the destruction of the Twin Towers, scalar weapons and other theories aside, these elements could theoretically be combined for a mass combustion reaction. Fuels for thermite include aluminum, magnesium, titanium, zinc, silicon, and boron. Aluminum is common because of its high boiling point and low cost, thus wildfires. Anyway, if I make a reference about the phoenix rising from the ashes, it will require my going on at length for those unaware of how our elite ruling class view the metaphor, how the US eagle was initially a phoenix, and even how it relates to the ancient concept of the serpent and dragon. In any case, given all the elements found in samples, those behind the chemtrail program must know what they are doing to the planet, let alone people, and that many of these elements may be highly combustible under the right set of circumstances. I know many will feel the technology of the sun simulator should also be mentioned here, how the sun has been changing from orange to hot white over the years, or how that may directly relate to an overall scheme of population control, with a number of end goal scenarios in mind. I will only point out the Georgia Guidestones, the supposed 10 commandments of the infamous Illuminati, with the first commandment being to keep the population under 500 million. That's a pretty lofty goal given we're at 7.5 billion right now. As the Guidestones were signed by one R.C. Christian, likely a pseudonym meaning Roman Catholic Christian or possibly Rosicrucian, it's difficult to say who actually built them, like the pyramids of Giza, a much debated mystery. In any case, whether through constant war, carcinogenic diets, Morgellons, or whatever other means, it seems that people still aren't dying fast enough to meet that first goal. Is it possible chemtrails are at least a major component of that final solution? Personally, I already know with absolute certainty that a multifaceted depopulation agenda is happening, and can at least say for myself that these things are very real. I've been a TI, a targeted individual, and a target of electronic harassment, torture really, for over 30 years. Another subject I intend to address soon, time allowing. A target may be chosen for various reasons of money, bloodlines, revenge, political affiliation, or just being a choice target of opportunity, while the number of targets has increased exponentially since World War II. But in the end, as was revealed by Senator Rockefeller and the many other times the government is known to have experimented on the public, we are all just lab rats living in a gilded cage or maze of insanity constructed by the elite. To really emphasize this point, I'll speak again on how the elite are actually the owls, swooping in from the darkness and preying on the public they consider lab rats even more than the so-called human cattle that I mentioned earlier. Chemtrails are only one side of a multifaceted plan of the elite to secure the Orwellian police state they created in the East, largely as communism, and continue to solidify in the West.